We are going to take you live to Melbourne, where Opposition Leader Peter Dutton is about to deliver a major pre-election pitch in the electorate of Chisholm. We are going to take you live to that very shortly. It's expected that he'll be electing a coalition government into power. He will say, rather, that electing a coalition government into power will be the last chance to reverse the economic and social decline of Australia.
Well, my friends, it's great to be back in Victoria. Thank you very much for being here today. I want to repeat what I've said before on many occasions, that the Liberal Party at a state and federal level is back in town. Now, you've heard from some of my incredible colleagues earlier, but to them, to our volunteers, to our candidates, to our state and federal MPs, and in particular Brad Batten here today. And Brad, congratulations on your ascension, mate. Thank you. And to Sam Groth as well, leading a fantastic team. I want to say thank you to all of you, to all of our party members, to all of our supporters here in Victoria and across the country. I want to say thank you to my amazing Deputy, Susan Lee. We entered into Parliament on the same day. Entered into Parliament on the same day, and it's been a much easier run for Susan than it has for me when you look at how much I've aged. And Susan has done a tremendous job in different portfolios, and it's evidenced every day in the work that she does as my deputy. I also want to say thank you very much to David Littleproud. Many Australians will get to know David even a little bit better over the coming months. They will know him to be a person of integrity, and they will know that our coalition has never been stronger. David, you are a superb leader of the Nationals, and I'm really delighted that you're here today, so thank you so much. Thank you also very much to Perrin Davey and to Bridget McKenzie for being here and part of the national team and the leadership team. Thank you. And to all of you here today. I want to commend the brilliant Katie Allen, who I have every confidence, and I know you share this confidence, that Katie will be the next member for Chisholm. If we win Chisholm, we're a step closer to winning government, and if we win government, we can get Victoria and our country moving again. Friends, it's a new year and it's an important one for our nation. This year, Australians will have an opportunity to remove a weak and incompetent government that has sent our country backwards. This year, Australians will have an opportunity to elect a new government and a new strong coalition government to get our country back on track. There's a saying, as many of you will have heard many times before, that oppositions don't win elections, that governments lose them. Well, of course, governments lose elections, but oppositions can, and in this instance, must win the next election. We can win the election, provided that people know what we stand for, and provided people understand our plan and our vision to better this country, and provided people recognise the values, the experience and the character of the alternative Prime Minister. I want no Australian to be left wondering what the coalition stands for. So today I want to outline our key priorities to get Australia back on track. But with this being my first speech of the year, I wanted to start by reminding Australians a little about who I am, where I'm from, what I've done and what I believe in. I was born into an outer suburbs working class family. Mum and Dad, a secretary and bricklayer, didn't have much money, but they worked every day of their life. They raised 5 children with love, support and an incredibly strong work ethic. From grade 7, many, many years ago, through to university, I threw newspapers, had a lawnmower run. I worked in a butcher shop after school and on Saturdays from grade 7 until I started uni. I have saved diligently over those years, and it allowed me to put together a deposit for a house. And I bought my first home at age 19, one of my proudest achievements. And in that butcher's shop, and in my dad's small building business, I saw the hard work required to run a small business and the decisions that needed to be made. That experience equipped me later in life with the mindset to run my own successful small business that employed about 40 staff. I completed a business degree and I was a police officer in Queensland for 9 years. I first worked in uniform and responded, obviously, as Brad Batten and others do, on a daily basis to some terrible, terrible incidents, like violent domestics and fatal motor vehicle accidents, suicides and people in their darkest hour. But I also saw the wonderful side of our society, people who were willing to step up and to provide support to those people who needed it most. I then became a detective and investigator of organised crime, of drug trafficking and sex offenders. When you put all of that together, and with all that I saw, the protection of women and children is something that continues to drive me today. My time in law enforcement made me appreciate all the more the importance of stable families and of safe communities. The roles, though, that I hold most dear are, of course, those of husband to Kiralee, to whom I've been married for 21 years, and father to Rebecca, Harry and Tom. My greatest privilege has been to serve my community and fellow Australians as the member for Dixon, and I've been in Parliament for 23 years. I've seen 7 Prime Ministers in action. I've worked very closely and worked and served under 4, and I've learnt from observing all of them. Being a minister, including in Cabinet, was an incredible honour. As Peter Costello's Assistant Treasurer, I helped make Australia's tax system fairer and reduced red tape for businesses. As Health Minister, I created the $20 billion Medical Research Future Fund and increased hospital funding. Now, unless Labor raids that Medical Research Future Fund, which is possible, as we know with the Labor Party and their mismanagement of money, that $20 billion will continue to grow. That money will be spent in medical research institutes here in Victoria and around the country to provide support to sick children, to elderly parents and to society more generally, so that we can provide that support and a brighter future for so many Australians over generations. As Health Minister, the bulk billing rate that I presided over was much higher than it is today. Indeed, bulk billing was 84% under my time as Health Minister, compared to 77% under Mr Albanese. As Immigration Minister, I kept the people smugglers out of business. I removed all the children from detention, and I resettled 4,000 vulnerable Yazidis, predominantly women and children, who have new lives in our great country and have escaped the Islamic State's barbarism. They haven't gone away, the Islamic State. They are there and they would seek to destroy our way of life and to degrade women and many others. And it is our task to stop them and to keep our country safe. Now, unlike the current government, when we brought those people in the migration program and to provide a new life to them, we undertook thorough character and security checks, and Jason Wood was central to many of those decisions that we've made in that crucial area of government endeavour. As the inaugural Home Affairs Minister, I brought together law enforcement and intelligence agencies to make our nation safer. I created the world-class Australian Centre to counter child exploitation, and as Defence Minister, thank you. And as Defence Minister, I delivered record funding for our men and women in uniform, and I played a pivotal role in negotiations in establishing AUKUS with the United States and the United Kingdom. And I laid the foundations. And I laid the foundations for our missile enterprise. As the Leader of the Opposition for the past 3 years, I am incredibly proud of what my team has accomplished. We are united, we've done the hard yards in developing policies, and we've engaged in a civilised battle of ideas. Our prosecution of the No case helped defeat our nation's most divisive referendum. Together we halted Labor's Orwellian misinformation bill, which will never be resurrected under a government I lead. With Labor acting like an opposition in government, we've acted like a government in opposition, especially in cleaning up their many shambolic programs, including in immigration. And with moral courage and clarity, we've fought against the anti-Semitism afflicting Australia. Across the country, I have met so many Australians from all walks of life. People have got to know me and what I stand for, and I believe that family is the most important unit in society. Strong and supported families make for a confident and resilient country. And I believe in my heart that we must preserve the innocence of childhood and nurture young minds in a responsible way. I believe in egalitarianism, in judging people by the content of their character, and in pushing back on identity politics. I believe in individual freedom, as you do, and the rule of law. And I believe that the main sources of enterprise and wealth creation are businesses and industries, not governments. Australians are best served by smaller government which gets off their backs, supports free enterprise and rips up regulation. But government does have a role to play in getting the big things right, in managing the economy responsibly, in ensuring our nation is secure and self-reliant, in nurturing unity based on shared values and common sense, and looking after citizens who are dealing with difficulty through no fault of their own. I love our country. I cherish what our forebears have gifted to us, especially those who have served in uniform, suffered and made the ultimate sacrifice for our country, for our freedom and for the greater good. I admire Australians. We're a remarkable people. We really are. We're compassionate, we're stoic, we're fair and we're quietly patriotic. But under this Albanese Labor government, I've seen the mood of Australians change. Australians have endured one of the most incompetent governments in our nation's history. They've suffered under one of our country's weakest prime ministers. And the last 3 years have been a litany of bad promises and broken promises and decisions that should have been honoured. As a result, Australians are worse off under Mr Albanese. Our country is less safe, our society is less cohesive. And for so many Australians, aspiration has been replaced by anxiety. Optimism has turned to pessimism for too many Australian families. And national confidence has changed dramatically over the course of that time. Mr Albanese says that this election is about the future versus the past. Well, I think the past 3 years are a good indication of what the future will look like under a returned Labor government. And that's a future that Australians can't afford, especially if the green teals of extreme nature, like the Greens. At least the Greens have the decency to tell people their true colour. The green teals pretended to be Liberals coming into the last election, but they're not. They're more closely associated with and vote with the Labor Party and the Greens in the Parliament. They will hold the balance of power. And a vote for a teal candidate is a vote for Anthony Albanese. Now, during my time in Parliament, here's a key thing that I've observed. When a government gets its priorities wrong, things go wrong for the Australian people. The Albanese government has had the wrong priorities. It's prioritised the agendas of inner-city Green voters, of activists and of union bosses. It's disregarded everyday Australian workers, families and small businesses, from city suburbs to regional towns to coastal communities, just like those here in this Labor-held seat of Chisholm. It's sidelined known industry winners, miners, manufacturers, fishers, foresters and farmers, and it's picked its own winners. It's built bigger government to exert more power instead of creating power in government to try and empower citizens. Labor will double down on its current priorities and positions if it wins the next election, and Australians should be very clear about that. Weak leaders create hard times, but strong leaders create better times. And the next federal election And the next federal election is a sliding door moment for our nation. A returned Labor government in majority or minority will see setbacks set in stone. A newly elected coalition government is the last chance to reverse this decline. Mr Albanese, who loves fighting Tories and who always plays the man and not the ball, has characterised his election, this election for Australians, as a future war. For him, what matters most is the political victory. Whereas I want our country to be victorious. I want Australia to emerge out of Labor's cost of living crisis. I want future generations of Australians to not be denied the prosperity that previous generations of Australians knew. The path to better times and a better country starts with having the right priorities. With the right priorities, you create the right policies, and with the right policies, things go right for the Australian people. Today, I'm pleased to launch our publication called Let's Get Australia Back on Track, the priorities of a Dutton Coalition government. And after outlining our priorities, new policies will emerge in the days and weeks ahead in the run-up to the election. It will complement what we've announced already, which is very significant. At the last election, despite the pandemic, the Coalition handed a very strong economic position to Labor. On almost every economic measure, Australia was either leading the world or performed better than most countries. Our debt was lower than any other major advanced economy. But in less than 3 years, as Angus Taylor regularly talks about, Labor has been a wrecking ball through the economy. The government has pulled every wrong lever since coming to power. And as Jane Hume points out regularly, spending has lifted by a staggering $347 billion. Personal income taxes paid by Australians under the Albanese government have gone up by 22%. The enterprise and productivity of business and industry has been suffocated by government intervention and regulation. And the cost of electricity has skyrocketed under a reckless renewables-only policy. Consequently, we are in a right mess. There's no end in sight to Labor's cost of living crisis. Under Labor, interest rates have gone up 12 times, and they should already have come down by now. Repeatedly, the RBA governor has said that inflation is now homegrown. That is, that with the government's rapid spending, it has caused inflation to rise and stay higher for longer. Households have now been in recession for 7 consecutive quarters, and Australians are living through the worst collapse in living standards on record. Everything is costing more: food, rents, mortgages, power and insurance. And more than 26,000 businesses have gone insolvent under Mr Albanese's watch. Australia's core inflation remains one of the highest in the G20 nations, and our country is facing more Labor deficits. To clean up this mess, here's some key priorities of a Dutton Coalition government. We will fight cost of living pressures. We will build a stronger economy, and we will cut government waste. Let me be clear. This government is living beyond its means. It's spending what it can't afford. And it's hurting Australians in the process. I know things like energy bill rebates and student debt subsidies help, but while providing temporary relief, such expenditure doesn't address the underlying problems. It just masks them. And when government overspends, interest rates and inflation stay higher for longer. Inflation makes every dollar that you earn buy less. Inflation reduces the purchasing power of your paycheck. And we can only escape the clutches of the cost of living crisis by reining in inflationary spending. And the expensive Panadol policies must stop. The necessary economic surgery to stop wasteful spending must start. And that's what a coalition government will do. Of course, there are key areas where we need to spend taxpayer money, as we did when we were in government, in record numbers, in defence, in health, the NDIS and aged care, to name but a few. But taxpayers must be reassured, particularly when they're fighting harder for every dollar themselves, that their money, their taxes are being spent prudently. Wherever possible, a dollar spent should create new dollars. The aim should always be to spend taxpayer money where it has an economic multiplying effect, where it generates productivity and where it can attract new investment. Infrastructure, resources and agricultural products are good examples of it, as is AUKUS, with its potential to foster a new arm of the economy. I'm in the game of ending government waste, and I did it standing alongside John Howard and Peter Costello. Here's just a few examples of Labor's indulgences: almost $500 million on a divisive referendum, billions of dollars to subsidise uncommercial projects like green hydrogen or the world's first fault-tolerant quantum computer, $600,000 for a speechwriter, $450,000 for welcome to country ceremonies. And I ask the question of all Australians. Has your life been improved under Mr Albanese by Labor hiring an extra 36,000 public servants costing $6 billion a year? Of course it hasn't. We will end government waste and we'll get back to doing things which help Australians. Worse than Whitlam. I agree. I agree. Now, a Dutton coalition government will deliver lower, simpler, fairer taxes. Australians should keep more of what they earn. And we will protect Australians' retirement tax savings from unfair new taxes. The government's proposal to tax an unrealised capital gain, to charge you a tax before you make the profit, is unbelievable. Your super is your money, not the government's, as Michael Sukkar regularly points out. We know Australians are hurting at the checkout, and we've committed to deterring the big supermarkets from undermining competition and ripping off consumers and farmers. Central to re-energising the economy is ripping up as much red and green tape as possible. We will defund the Environmental Defender's Office. And we will slash the resource approval timeframes in half. It means that more digging means more trucks move, which means more gas flows, which means more tax revenues and royalties. We were up in the Pilbara only a few weeks ago. In the Rio Tinto operation up there, in 1 year, through royalties and company taxes, they paid $10 billion to the Australian Taxation Office and the WA government. That $10 billion provides funding here in Victoria and in New South Wales and in Tasmania across the country for schools, for our police and for all of our essential services. It means that there's more money for infrastructure, for the NDIS, for aged care and for defence in an uncertain time. To unleash the potential of the marketplace, another priority of a coalition government is to back small business. We will increase the instant asset write-off to $30,000 and make this arrangement ongoing. We will revert to a simple definition of a casual worker and we will curtail union militancy. Thank you. And we will curtail militant unions in the workplace. More than anything else, exorbitant energy costs are causing inflation across the economy. Food, goods and services are all costing more. Thanks to Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen's train wreck renewables only policy, Australians are paying some of the highest electricity costs in the world. Your electricity bill hasn't gone down by $275. It's gone up by about $1,000. Our grid is unstable and Australians are being asked to ration power and warned about blackouts in our country in the 21st century. Manufacturers have moved offshore where energy is cheaper. We lose the jobs and we lose the economic productivity. You can't run a full-time and functioning economy using part-time power and unreliable power. And as such, thank you. As such, a further priority of a coalition government is to deliver affordable and reliable energy. More immediately, we will ramp up domestic gas production to get power prices down and restore stability to our grid. Over the longer term, we will place the latest net zero emission zero emission, not even net zero. We will replace the existing coal generation network with zero emission nuclear technologies on those sites of the 7 retired coal-fired power plants. It's incredibly important for our country. It really is. Thank you. We will have a balanced energy mix of renewables, of gas, and ultimately nuclear to replace coal. The independent and respected Frontier Economics costed our plan. It's 44% cheaper than Labor, which saves us $263 billion. Labor will continue to carpet prime agricultural land, national parks and coastlines with industrial-scale renewables. We will preserve our environment. Nuclear power allows us to maximise the highest yield of energy per square metre and minimise our environmental footprint. The Coalition's push to have Australia join the growing league of nuclear-powered stations is one of the most visionary policies our country has ever contemplated. And it's worth pausing because there's no prospect under the Labor Party, certainly not under the leadership of Anthony Albanese, to embrace a policy which will transform our economy. It's time to dispense with short-termism and shore up our energy security for generations to come. It surely is. I can see why Brad Batten and Sam Groth are waving their booklets there. It's hot inside. Now, I want to say this to all Australians. Just as energy is a major concern for Australians, so too are migration and housing. I think it's an incredibly important issue for us to contemplate. Rebalancing our migration program and fixing our housing crisis will be an absolute priority for a coalition government. Labor has opened the migration floodgates. A record 1 million migrants have arrived in Labor's first 2 years. Migration's been great for our country, but it needs to be well managed. That's 70% more than in any previous 2-year period. At the same time, we've had cost escalation in construction. We've had the CFMEU running rampant across building sites. And so Labor has created the perfect storm. It's put pressure on housing, on infrastructure and services. And with only 350,000 homes built over the same period, demand has far outstripped supply, and the coalition will take action. We'll impose a 2-year ban on foreign investors and temporary residents purchasing existing Australian homes. We will reduce the permanent migration program by 25% for 2 years, from 185,000 to 140,000, and we'll return it back over the next couple of years to more sustainable long-term levels. We'll work with major metropolitan universities to set stricter caps on foreign student numbers to relieve stress on city rentals, and that is an incredibly important step to take. Using these levers, we'll free up new homes, and we've also committed to $5 billion to support the building of essential infrastructure like housing, like water, power, sewerage and access roads. And the funding will get stalled projects off the ground, and we're confident that with that, we can build 500,000 new homes. An issue close to my heart is restoring the dream of home ownership, which has been lost under this government. Today, home ownership is beyond the reach for far too many Australians, particularly young Australians. And that's why a coalition government will allow Australians to access up to $50,000 of their super to buy their first home. And we'll extend that policy. We'll extend that policy to make sure that we can help women who have been separated, particularly later in life, to get back on track and to get their lives back together. Another priority of a coalition government, of course, is to deliver quality healthcare. The Albanese government paints itself as the health system saviour, but bulk billing has fallen from 88% when we were in government to 77% under Labor, and GP services, free services, are down by 40 million. And we're facing a shortfall of 8,000 GPs by 2031. A coalition government will grow our GP workforce. We will incentivise junior doctors to train in general practice to help fill shortages in suburbs and regional areas. Our review of the Medicare and pharmaceutical benefits scheme will result in cheaper and new medicines for women, and we will restore the number of Medicare subsidised psychological sessions from 10 to 20 and on a permanent basis. Labor is again resorting... Thank you. Labor is again resorting to a Mediscare campaign. It's its third attempt in less than a decade. They need a new play sheet, honestly. We will commit to Medicare, as we did in government. Every time Labor's played this card, look at what we've done in government. We've strengthened Medicare, and we commit to that again today. We'll also not neglect disadvantaged Indigenous Australians. The Prime Minister has essentially forgotten about Indigenous Australians since The Voice. Labor's lost its way when it comes to energy, and we will address that issue as well, as I say. But with the defeat of The Voice, we have an opportunity to move away from symbolic gestures, from activist-driven agendas and more Canberra-based bureaucracy. We can press ahead under a coalition government with our priority on practical action for Indigenous Australians. And as Jacinta Price said, it's time to dispense with the racial stereotyping, which treats all Aboriginal Australians the same. Now, there are communities where safety, housing, health, education and employment are critical issues. That's where our efforts must be targeted. We will start with a full audit into spending on Indigenous programs. And Indigenous communities... And in Indigenous communities where drugs and alcohol are prevalent, we will reintroduce the cashless debit card for working age welfare receipts in consultation with communities to make sure that children are getting the support from their parents that they deserve. We'll bolster law and order in crime-heavy communities, and we'll hold a Royal Commission into sexual abuse in Indigenous communities. If Labor has neglected Indigenous Australians, it's treated regional Australians like second-class citizens. Chris Bowen has steamrolled over regional communities with his industrial-scale renewables rollout. Plibersek and Murray Watt have stymied new mines, gas projects, live sheep exports and salmon farming, the lifeblood of regional Australia. Jim Chalmers has cut billions from regional infrastructure projects. And Anthony Albanese flies in for the photo op. He utters soothing words only to deliver a different message to a city audience. Whereas a priority for our government is to grow a stronger regional Australia. I want to make our nation a mining, agricultural and manufacturing powerhouse again. And regional Australia is at the centre of that vision. And that's why we'll invest in regional roads and services and healthcare. An activist-led Labor Party has turned its back on industries which are our natural strengths. I won't, because they're still important alongside new areas of the economy, like artificial intelligence and automation. But just as we want a resilient regional Australia, we want communities to be resilient across Australia. Another priority for a Dutton Coalition government is to build strong and sustainable communities. Now that, of course, means many things, but it means seeing children taught the basics, reading, writing and maths, through explicit instruction across our primary education system. And it means, my friends, that we send our children to school for an education, not for an indoctrination. It means restricting social media for under 16s, given the impacts of harmful content and constant connectivity on young minds, whilst ensuring age verification in no way compromises individual privacy. It means providing families with affordable childcare. It means guaranteeing NDIS support to Australians with permanent and significant disability and making sure that that money is spent wisely and according to the law. It means funding an aged care system where older Australians have the dignity, respect and assistance they deserve. It means cherishing and looking after all our veterans, especially those who have suffered due to their service. And it means reviving our unity by nurturing pride in our country, celebrating the achievement of modern Australia, standing up for our values and coming together under one flag. We're going to keep Australians safe because that will always be a key priority of a coalition government. And there's nobody better in this business than James Paterson, and you see that on a daily basis. Alongside Jason Wood and the rest of our team, they have the experience, the runs on the board, and the ability and the backbone to stand up for what is right to keep our country safe. The Albanese government has failed in this most basic duty. More than 280 hardcore criminals, including murderers and sex offenders, were released from immigration detention into the community by the government. And as it turns out, it wasn't necessary to do that. Some 65 criminals or more have already offended. And negligently, the government granted tourist visas to 3,000 people from a terrorist-controlled war zone without conducting thorough checks. People smugglers were again given the green light when Labor dismantled Operation Sovereign Borders, and almost 500 people have tried to enter our country illegally on 26 boats, of which 7 have reached Australia. Youth crime has surged across the country, and tragically, some 78 women lost their lives in violent circumstances last year alone. Shockingly, anti-Semitism has surged by more than 700%, and every incident of anti-Semitism can be traced back to the Prime Minister's dereliction of leadership in response to the sordid events on the steps of the Sydney Opera House. Anti-Semitism should have been stopped there and then. The government... The government is so morally confused it treats our ally Israel like an adversary. And moreover, its push for Palestinian statehood at this time would reward Hamas's use of terrorism to achieve political ends. And despite wars in the Middle East and Eastern Europe and tensions in our region, the government has reduced defence spending to under 2% of GDP. And our defence bureaucracy is operating on a business-as-usual basis. Our government will make sure that a significant investment is made into defence. We will equip our military at speed and scale to play our part as a credible partner in promoting peace through strength. And in the first days of a coalition government, I will call the Prime Minister of Israel to mend the relationship that Labor has trashed so badly. We stopped the boats before, and I promise you we will do so again. I cancelled more than 6,300 visas of dangerous non-citizen criminals, people who had committed sex offences against children and women, people who had murdered, people who had been involved in drug trafficking. And we will not hesitate to do the same again in government. If you're a guest in our country, inciting or committing violence, you will be kicked out under a Dutton government. And if you're doing the same... If you're doing the same as a citizen, I promise you, you will feel the full force of the law. A Dutton coalition government will develop national uniform knife laws, toughen bail laws, and introduce tougher penalties to prevent coercive control. Most importantly, we will provide the moral and political leadership needed to restore law, order and justice. My friends, in closing, the priorities I've outlined today are our compact with Australians. We will govern with respect for the views, values and the vision of everyday Australians. Soon, Australians will again have a say in determining the future of our great country. When they do, they will be under no misapprehension as to what a coalition government stands for and what we plan to do. In that knowledge, I hope and I'm certain that Australians will recognise that a coalition government is the only chance to get our country back on track. Thank you so much and have a great 2025. Thank you.
Opposition Leader Peter Dutton delivering a major pre-election pitch in the electorate of Chisholm in Melbourne there. He says the upcoming election is a battle between a weak and incompetent Labor government and a new and strong coalition government that will get our country back on track. He outlined some of the coalition's priorities there, saying that the focus will be on cost of living, cutting government waste, lower, simpler and fairer taxes, as well as affordable energy, building a resilient regional Australia and keeping Australians safe as well, something that he says the Albanese government has failed.